Hello, and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today, we're going to talk about vision. We're going to talk about soul intention. We have a great guest here, someone I met on LinkedIn, and he reached out to me, and what a rock star. Just so awesome, looking at what he's been up to. And so I'm really excited to have him here, Chris Yonker. He is a vision alchemist, speaker, and author who specializes in vision creation to align your business and your life. He embraces a uniquely collaborative and experiential approach to being in the zone, developing clarity and composure under fire, and discovering unlimited potential. He is a 7th degree black belt, Neuro-Linguistic Programming and NLP practitioner, and thought leader in personal performance. So I'm just really excited to have him here. He actually wrote a book as well. It's nice and short. I like short and quick and down and dirty books, which gets right to it. It's called Soul Intention, an Executive's Guide to Building a Life by Choice, Not by Chance. So Chris, welcome to the Leaders Transformation. We're excited that you're here today.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited.
It's a pleasure. So how did you get interested in vision creation?
I at some point I realized there's a connection, and I can't give you the exact point. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I had this epiphany at some point in my life," but I realized that there's a direct correlation to what we focus on intentionally, with, I would say, conviction, and what we are able to manifest or just produce. And I mean, manifest, I don't mean just sit at home and think about something and then God drops it in our lap out of the sky. There's, I believe that we have a higher level of control in how we want our lives to look, in a way, more than than most of us realize, I should say. I'm generalizing, but I'm just speaking into humanity. And yeah, so anyway, go ahead. I was gonna go somewhere else, and I just stopped myself from going into a rabbit hole. That's what I did right there, but now I'm back.
That's awesome.
That was a rabbit hole aversion. It's a strategy I have from time to time.
That's right. That's right. Well, we could all use that as entrepreneurs, for sure. Well, I know you have a background in sales, so talk about that, how you've actually applied some of this.
I do. What's interesting is the biggest challenge that I had in sales was going from selling for a company to selling myself. And you say, well, you're selling yourself. Well, I don't know. You go ahead and start selling a service where someone's hiring you to coach, advise, counsel them, and charge them, what you might define as a significant amount of money, and own it. And let me tell you, that really gets into your thinking. And when it's so funny you bring up sales. I talked to the guy who, my first sales trainer, he just published a book, actually. When I started at 3M back in 1992, he was a sales trainer and a really good guy. But one of the things that he encouraged me was to get better at, I would say, it's not only just sales, but personal development as a general. And I've always been an avid learner, so that worked good for me. And I actually got audios from my car, tape decks, not 8-track tape decks, but cassette tapes. And I realized the more I learned about something, the better I got at it. And I did not really want to get into sales, honestly, from the beginning. But then I realized it was kind of a fun career to have. And the reason it was a fun career to have is there's a lot of autonomy that you can create it's outcome driven. And if you work for a good company or a good manager, you can kind of create your own destiny. And I also believe that solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, most of them have some level of sales acumen. It's necessary to be in business. It's in some level, and I'm very thankful, very, very thankful that it's something that I can say I mastered. I mean, I've gotten very good at it, and I could have built my business on that alone, but I just chosen not to because of, not that I don't work with salespeople, but typically the folks I work with, it's not just that. So, yeah.
Well, and there's something that's kind of like the arena that you can play in. Like you said, you can
Yeah,
work with salespeople, whatever, but there's something deeper that you're addressing here, which is like
it
soul
is.
intention,
Yeah,
vision, having a clear
yeah,
path for your life. And what you're, even in your book, you talk about, you know, concepts that can be applied to anything,
yeah.
not just one particular arena. Actually, it reminds me of one of my mentors, Blair Singer. He wrote a book called Sales
Yeah.
Dogs, and yeah,
Yeah,
he's
yeah, yeah.
awesome,
Like,
right?
didn't he do something like Kiyosaki? Didn't he do like some partnership or collaboration with Robert
Oh, he was
Kiyosaki?
friends. Yeah, he was friends
Okay.
with Robert,
That's
and
why I
they
recognize
actually
the name.
they
Yeah.
started out together. And he went to go work for one company. Robert went to go work for another company because they knew they had to learn how to sell, and they didn't know how to sell. They needed to learn how to
Interesting.
sell. So they chose two companies that were Xerox and at the time was Burroughs and became Ulysses. And so they went there because their training program was really good and they could learn and so forth. One of the
Interesting.
things that Blair talks about is, and he, of course, he has his book, Sales Dogs. He is a rich dad advisor, but he's also written other books on like Team
Mhm.
Code of Honor, Little
Okay.
Voice Mastery, and all this kind of stuff. Well, the reason why I mention it is because he is a huge advocate of what you just talked about in the area of personal development. When you develop yourself personally,
Yeah.
your sales increase. That was his
Yeah.
experience. He said, the more
Yeah.
personal development I did, the more money I made, the more successful I got,
Yeah.
and so that's why it's, rather than going up here and selling sales, teaching sales techniques, it's going much deeper to what actually creates lasting change, which is what this show is all about. Leaders of Transformation.
Yeah.
It's about creating that transformation, transforming the way people see themselves, others, and the world around them, so that they can make a greater impact in the world. So with that in mind, I would love for you to talk about in your book something that I picked up, which I thought would be interesting to talk about is, you talk about becoming not me,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
that can be
What's that?
confusing. Yeah. What
What
does
does
that
that mean?
mean? How
Yeah.
it could, because that can be confusing to people and they're like, I'm trying to find me. And you're saying, no, no,
Yeah.
no. How about if you not
Yeah.
become not me?
Yeah.
Elaborate.
Yeah. That is a deep well right there, that topic. And I love that one in particular. If I could, we have to enter this in an vantage point that as human beings, we create our reality, or I would call it the map of the map of the world, our experience based upon our past, the interpretations of things that have happened in the past, who we've allowed to have influence in our lives, and we artfully start architecting subconsciously our model of the world of two things in specific that I like to break down. One is the belief about who we are, and the belief about how the world works and what it's all about. And even further with that, and go to the third point, what is it that we really want, right? So the three questions I always like to ask people is, who am I? Why am I here? And what do I want? These are like very deep questions. And from my coaching aspect, a lot of coaching goes like, well, what do you want? Well, I want this, this, and this. Okay, let's go get that. But there's no check-in on, well, why do you want it? Like, because society told you should, because the people on Instagram had it, because you thought that would make you happy, and then you realize once you got it, you didn't get any happier. So then now you're a miss. And so our self-concept, self-esteem, regards to the way we look at who we are, is quite frankly a big part of the challenges that we end up holding and having, because we're creating our own madness from this concept of, well, I am this. So that's, when someone says to me, well, that's not really who I am. I said, well, that's interesting. Well, that's not really who you are. What does that mean? I've created a story about who I am. And if any part of that story is different all of a sudden, I go into conflict, and I've got to get back to homeostasis about who I am. And when I learned NLP, a mentor, Wyatt, one thing he'd say is, typically people that we've become close to and associated with, they don't like it when we change. And because it doesn't map into how they figure, in regards to how they look at themselves and how things work, and it creates a challenge. And in fact, some cases, the ways they manipulate us no longer work when we change. if that's the case, depending on the context of the relationship. So it can be a bit bizarre, but here's Nicole, here's something that's interesting to think about. Like if you got on a plane and you flew somewhere you've never been before, and that's basically created a new life, just you. And you dress different, did your hair different, just whatever it is, like just cut loose to whatever that is. No one would treat you any differently because they wouldn't know that that wasn't you, right? Like, isn't that kind of crazy to think about?
Yeah.
And then when we show up and the part of the reasons that's so important to me too is when you're in sales, one of the things you realize is that there's your self-concept and self-image really becomes your barometer in regards to how far you're able to go and even how much income, because there's a direct correlation to what I believe about myself and my self-worth and how much money I'll allow into my world, which is pretty fascinating. So you want to increase your income. It comes down to as well, if you increase your self-worth, and this is not being an ignorant ass going out there and just, it's about really just owning yourself. And I think being humble is important. It's not about not that. Confidence and being humble can be you can have both those at the same time without an issue. But the fact of the matter is that it really allows you to go into deep in regards to how I look at myself and what I think and believe about who I am and how much I love myself and how much self-esteem I have. And then as you work on those things and get better at those things, what do you know? Relationships get better, your success gets better, and your happiness, the happiness that we drive is better. And so I tell folks like, hey, if you decide you want to work with me, some of how you've defined yourself will end up changing. And if you're not comfortable with that, then you probably don't want to work with me because, and I've had people show up and say that they wanted certain things, like I want my own plane or I want this or this and this, and that could afford those things. But when the fact of the matter is those outcomes were all ego driven and to satisfy something about how they define themselves. And we get to do some pretty deep work to work through what have I created in this, my false reality in regards to things that I think need to happen for me to be happy. Because the interesting thing is, guess what? Once you obtain those things, you're still not happy.
Yeah.
That's why you're not happy now. And so, how do you have more joy, peace, and happiness and fulfillment in the journey, on the journey? Like that's my movie. Like I think we should be able to do both. I'm into growth. I'm into more. I think that's all positive as long as it's aligned with our truth of who we are and what we want, but not from an ego standpoint and not from a dysfunctional standpoint.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that speaks to a lot of times what we are looking for. We think it's out there, like when this happens, it's the whole be do have, right? So when I have this, then I'll do this, then I'll be this, and it's all out there and we're chasing things. And I think even over the last 12 months, it's been fascinating. I've had people say, how are you feeling? Are you like stressed? I'm like, no, I'm not stressed because I'm not deriving my peace. I'm not deriving my joy and my bliss or even my creativity. And like, I'm not deriving it from what's happening around me. Certainly association is important. You got to have a healthy environment and so forth. That certainly does make an impact, but it's coming from the inside. The love, the joy, the peace, the fulfillment. Is all coming from the inside. Yeah.
It does. And I have one thing I would say in this perspective of like going back to the vision side. In the way I look at it is I started architecting like, well, what would be the hierarchy if I were to build a vision? What would make sense in regards to structure? Like what would come first and why? And because I found from my own career path at times, working with others, so many people that were miserable and all they did was they bitched and complained about their job or their experience or whatever it is. I'm like, well, you're in the driver's seat. Who's making you stay here? And there's this victim mentality that I talk about in the book a little bit. But as you look at like what's most important, it's I believe that, for all of us, we all starting at the bottom is just like, well, sooner or later we got to realize that we're not going to be here forever, and that's just the reality. Like, we are not going to be here forever. And then there's a context for folks. It could be religion, could be spirituality, but like just an understanding of something about what this is about is a good basis to begin from, because I believe that some of the greatest leverage we have is facing and looking at our own mortality. And like, if you study like the folks from the Stoic era and like Aristotle, they actually contemplated, like a daily contemplation was this, this will pass, like this will come to an end. Basically, he had this contemplation, and it's an interesting contemplation, right? Like, but it's a reminder that each day is a gift. And I think once you realize, like, I lost my dad last year, we lost my father-in-law last year, almost lost my mom last year, and you start realizing this stuff, you're like, whoa, I guess it's not going to last forever. Right? And then you start thinking,
Yeah.
like, I'm 51. So I was like, oh, well, what were they doing when I was their age? I'm their age. And what were they, you start thinking that kind of stuff. And how much time do and you get, I think it's a great thing to do, because it just creates some leverage and being extremely intentional about how we live, and knowing that you can do that, especially today, the way society is. You can architect it the way you want to. And then from there, then it goes to well-being. You mentioned earlier, like joy, peace, happiness, stress management, how well we care for ourselves. Because if you're not healthy, then you're going to suffer probably, to some degree. So so you got well-being, and then from there, then it's okay. Well, how am I managing myself mentally and emotionally? And then from there, then now I'm into loving relationships. Do I want to have a loving relationship? And that could be, you could define that in a lot of different contexts, but typically it's someone that we would, in our society, it could be same sex, could be different, doesn't matter, but in regards to the relationship that we want to maintain with someone. And then it goes into family and social and aspects, and then we get into experiences, and then we can get into career. Like, and I find some folks have it backwards. They focus on the career, the business, whatever, and then there's all this stuff below gets jacked up. And then I'm trying to help them fix it because they're way out of balance. And it's an interesting concept. But at the end of the day, don't you think, what do we have? Like, what do we have? Like, you have the moment, then it's gone. So really, isn't life the accumulation of memories in most cases, right? Like, experiences.
Absolutely.
And I am
Yeah.
like, okay, well then how do we create the most meaningful, memorable, beneficial experiences?
Yeah. I don't think anybody at the end of their life, and, the old cliche of, I don't think anybody's going to say, gee, I wish I spent more time at the office.
Right?
That's probably not going to be top of mind. They're going to, those loving relationships. What's interesting about that hierarchy of, and I was going to ask you about that hierarchy of fulfillment for you to talk about that. So it's perfect. Is, like, for example, loving relationships, you've got to have some of the other pieces in place first
That's
before
right.
you get there.
That's right.
Because otherwise, then you're going to look to that loving relationship. I was recently talking to someone who had been in a relationship, and then left that relationship, jumped into another relationship, which happens often, right? Jump to the next one, that didn't work out, jump to the next
Yeah.
one. And it's like, well, you got to stop and check in,
Yeah.
right, on those lower levels of fulfillment, so that you're whole and complete, and you're
Yeah.
deriving your joy and, your fulfillment and everything from within, so that when you go into a relationship, you got two whole and complete people that are coming into that relationship, and now you can do something amazing, and then you can build on it from there.
Very, very true and accurate. If you think about it, if I love myself at a level 4 and my self-esteem's at a 5, I will automatically attract someone into my life that will match me somewhere. And I typically will create a dysfunctional relationship to try to fill the void I have because I don't love myself enough.
That's right.
So that I'm going to need something external from you to allow that to work. And I've seen a bit of this in family businesses. I've done a bit of family business transitional work, which I love doing. And it's funny when people come across me and they're like, well, we've got some dysfunction in our family. I'm like, oh, well, it's like, oh, really? You're different? Okay. It's the case in most and it's a complex, because then you got this function of the business, the function of the family, and there's an opportunity to do some healing and some work. So I dig it, but it is very interesting, and you're very, very right. And people go, they seek that if they worked on themselves, they get to have a higher level relationship the next time around. Because it's like one of those things, if you don't learn the lesson gets to repeat.
Yep.
Isn't that exciting? And usually it repeats a little stronger.
Yes.
Than the first time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the nudge. It's the tap on the shoulder. And then eventually it's the Mack truck that hits you. Can you hear me now? Oh, yeah. That's the lesson. Oh, I've got it now. Oh, thank you. We don't need to wait to the Mack truck to get to that point, for sure. There's something else you talk about in the book that I wanted to unpack, which is the struggle. And in the entrepreneurial space, a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs. There is a popularization, I will say, of the struggle and the grind, the hustle.
Yeah.
And you talk about it being an artificial paradigm. Now, I know that, in nature, there's a struggle in the cocoon, and you can talk about that, right? And if you cut it open and the butterfly dies because part of the process, there's all of that. So talk about which I believe there's usually not the either or, it's kind of an and.
Yeah. And
so
I think,
talk about that though.
And it's important, as someone who studies neuro-linguistics and language, the language, they represent, like, if we have to unpack a little bit about what we mean by that, right? Because we hear a word and we go, everyone goes, oh, it has their own vision or the picture, like it's either a picture in their mind, a movie of what that word means, right? And struggle, I'm not a major fan of the word, but I'll talk about what I mean by that and why I say that. Because to me, oftentimes when someone's struggling, reason I say this is because my association comes from my experience and my own paradigms, and my association experience says that people are struggling, they're usually suffering. And when we're struggling, there's a high level of resistance. And the fact of the matter is, in order to have resistance, something has to be pushing back on what we're pushing on. Like, you can't physically manifest resistance without something in nature pushing back, right? And we got to ask, well, what are we resisting? And typically when we're resisting something, it's something presented something to us and we don't like it. And a challenge that I have with that, and I've learned for myself, is it's okay to accept what is, doesn't mean you have to live with it. But accepting what is an important element in transformation. Because if I don't realize where I'm at and accept where I'm at, it's very difficult to navigate beyond without knowing where I am. And a lot of the work that I do with folks is it's really helping people become aware at an extremely intense level. And once I become more aware, I can make change much easier than before. And there's a construct, there's a belief as entrepreneurs that I must struggle and work hard to have success. I believe that work is necessary. It's the hard I have a challenge with. Now, if people want to work hard and they believe they need to work hard, they will have to work hard. If they believe they have to struggle, they will have to struggle. I've chosen not to. I don't like it. I don't like struggling. I've tried that. I don't like it. And I've found, for me, in my experience and my clients' experience, when we're struggling and we're resisting, there's something we're not paying attention to. Because when things go well, it's almost always easy. How can that be? How can that be? And work is necessary, but the struggle and the suffering is truly, truly optional. And I remember a CEO I worked with, and they get to the cut to the chase on the story. We were getting some breakthroughs, and he's getting back in the business and jacking things up. And I asked him, what's going on? And he gave me the stories, which I should have known better not to ask that question. So then I said, what do you believe about success? What? I want to know, what do you believe about success? He said, well, you work hard, and you struggle, and then you break through. And I said, well, what if you didn't have to struggle? And he said, then I wouldn't deserve the reward. Oh, I'm like, wow. Okay. Well, what if you didn't have to, though? Would that be okay? And he said, for my entire life, I wouldn't know how that you could do that, because for my entire life, I've never had that experience. But he never believed you could have it. So we took a good year to remap that so that he could create a different outcome. I mean, I was probably the 5th person he had hired to help get this transition done, and he wasn't able to, because everyone else was trying to push him through. It's like he's got the emergency brake on, and they're like, well, just give it more gas. Let's give it a bigger engine in there. We'll get you to the other side. And it's like, well, what if you just figured out how to take the emergency brake off?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It brings me back to one time I had this high-powered franchisor that I cold called, and he was like, "Oh, I don't need any more of these trainers, coaches. I had lots of these that call me all the time and so forth." He says, "I'm not interested." He said, "If my franchisees," this was the gift.
Yeah.
He says, "If my franchisees would just do what they're told, everything would be fine." And I was like, "Thank you."
Yeah.
Yes. Right. And I said,
Yeah.
"Got it. So would you like to know
Yeah.
why that is?" "Yeah, I would like to know why that is." And there we went from there. But to your point, is sometimes we're powering through things, pushing through. And you bring up a good point about language. I'm a big fan of language, and I know that our words create our world, and life and death is in the power of our tongue. And so our words have creative power.
Yeah.
And when we are using a word, oftentimes we are not aware of what that word, or we have our own paradigm of what that word means. And
Yeah.
so it is to our benefit to, when we use a word, to ask ourselves, what actually does that mean to me? And is that what the author or whoever meant by that? You look at Gary Vaynerchuk or whatever, and maybe,
Yeah.
not everybody wants his life, right? But he talks about hustle and grind, and he uses
Yeah.
certain
He does.
language,
He does.
and people go, "Oh, so that means I got to struggle, and it's
Yeah.
got to be difficult, and I got to, like, on New Year's Eve." I remember in past years, there'd be people on New Year's Eve and saying, like, "Who else is working on New Year's Eve?" Yeah, like the Warriors.
Yeah.
Like, is
Yeah.
that the
Look at
goal
me.
though? Yeah,
Look at
look at
me.
me.
You
I'm
know?
working so
Yeah.
hard. And
That's right.
you think about,
Paying the price.
paying the price. No pain, no gain,
That's
and
right.
it's like
Woo!
all of this
Yeah.
language, and then we wonder why our life is difficult. So really, really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. It's like, I look at myself as an athlete. I don't compete, but I use that philosophy and that word because I believe athletes treat their bodies well, right? And
Yeah.
I want to. My grandfather, who died at 99, was playing tennis up to at least 90, and so like he's a mentor, if you will, in regards to how I'm like, all right, why not? Why? That sounds amazing, and so, but think about what you just said. What if I said, you know what? I'm gonna go and grind my legs and go grind my legs on the elliptical and this and that. Like, I'm gonna go grind my knees. I'm like, who'd want to do that? Right? I'm going to
Yeah.
wreck them. I'm going to go wreck. Like, if you grind something, someone's like, well, no, you're polishing it. I guess, I suppose you can use that analogy, but I don't think that's the analogy you're using. I don't think you're using that picture typically when you're using that word. I think grinding is more like, something that's getting worn, getting worn down, if you will. And I remember studying Jim Lower many years ago, and he's got the Energy Project. Schwartz, the other author, I'm trying to get the name of the book, but they did all these studies in regards to output and recovery, and how important recovery is, and the balance. In fact, the fact of the matter is, and all the studies have been done, that having that balance and that stillness and that time and the space actually accelerates progress. And I started reading that, I'm like, whoa, what if everything I thought up till now? And I just love, when I read Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Work Week, many years ago when it first came out, I was like, this is interesting. There's something, it really got me thinking, I need to build a team around me. That's like right away, I need to build a team around, like, this is something that there's something here. Things can look a lot different and that book got me thinking that perhaps things could look a lot different. And consequently, they do.
Well, and that's why we do this podcast. That's why we interview people like yourself, to give people offer them a different paradigm, offer them a different experience. Because if, like your client, if you don't know something is even possible, then how can you create it?
Right.
And so to be able to, and to your point about transformation begins with awareness. You first got to be aware of it. Then you got the choice. Look at what am I going to do with that awareness? And then there's, of course, the follow through. And so, yeah, that's why getting around people, listening to people, being mentored by people, that coaching with people that have an expansive paradigm or can challenge the status quo, if you will, so you can shift from there. So that's really good. One last thing before we wrap up, you talk about faith equals power, which I'm a big fan of. I believe that. Talk about how did you discover that for yourself? Faith equaling power.
It comes there's I think we get challenged in our world in relationship to when we don't see something that we're looking to be different, if you will. You have an intention, you see something that you want, you have a vision, a dream, a goal, but there's no evidence in the moment of that. And it reminds me of a quote. I would say evidence of absence is not absence of evidence. And I think that's Pritchett that said that, but regardless, it's like, well, because I don't see it. How do I? We get so hung up in the how of certain things, right? And we have clarity in what we want. And what I've realized with faith is like, okay, and there's two pieces to the faith and the trust that is necessary. One is in whatever my relationship or belief is in regards to something beyond myself, and the trust that what that is, and then the trust in myself and the faith in myself. Those two two pieces working together. And if I work on those two pieces, then I have a lot less to worry about. And I'm a recovering worrier. I came from a whole lineage of warriors, and it's a tough habit to get out of. And faith has been the antidote. Let's learn to unpack what that means and how to live when you're working in a high order of faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it ties back to this whole idea of vision. I mean, how can you have vision if you don't have faith? How do you have vision? Because vision is something that you're seeing, unless you have a vision or sight for what is, and then you just keep creating the same over and over again. But when you're talking about building a vision for the future, it's something that is not yet in existence.
That's right.
In
So
your life, at least.
Where did it come from?
Yeah. Yeah.
Instagram.
There you go.
Maybe. Hopefully
Google.
Not. Yeah.
Yeah. So good. So good, Chris. Well, I love the way you think and articulate, this idea of living a life by choice and not by chance, living a life that you choose, and asking yourself, like when you ask people, what do you want? And they'll tell you right off the bat. And the question is, like, do you really want that? And why do you want that? And oftentimes I find like people don't achieve their goals, and they say, they beat themselves up because they don't achieve their goals. But it's actually, it wasn't their real goal in the first place. It
No,
sounded good,
it did.
and they get stuck in that. And, I'm talking about even successful people sometimes. I've had successful people say, "Oh, I hate this like goal setting thing. When I just go for it, I get more accomplished than I, try to do this goal setting thing." Why? Because it's like you're seeing the two things as separate, right?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to be shooting for? And what do I actually want to do? And
Yeah.
what if those two things could actually, be married together and
Yeah.
create what you actually want? So it's
The
really,
and
really
the
good.
and the and paradigm versus the either or paradigm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So really, really good. Well, Chris, thank you so much
Thank
for
you for inviting me
spending a
on.
few
It was
minutes. It's
fun.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And for our listeners and viewers, I would encourage you to go to chrisyonker.com. Of course, that'll be on leadersoftransformation.com. In the show notes, we'll make sure that you can connect with him, as well as some social links to connect with Chris and check out what he's doing. And make sure you get a copy of his book, Soul Intention. It's a great read. It's, like I said in the beginning, it's short, it's sweet, it gets right to the point, but it opens up the conversation, and to give some questions that you can ask yourself to start challenging your paradigm, start challenging what you believe to be true, and gives you a guide, some guideposts to start moving towards what it is that you really want, your soul's intention. So I encourage you to get a copy of that. And again, Chris, thanks for being here. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of
Thank you.
Transformation real soon.